The departure board still works. That's the part I stopped trying to explain to people, because the explaining never went anywhere good, and after a while you learn which truths cost you more than they're worth. So let me just tell it the way it happened, in order, the way I'd write it up if anybody ever asked me for a report, which they won't. The county doesn't want a report. The county wants the building gone. My name doesn't matter much, but I'll give it anyway. So this doesn't feel like one of those stories people make up. Call me Ray. I worked for the county facilities department for 19 years, mostly buildings nobody thinks about: the old courthouse annex, the water treatment outbuildings, 2 libraries, a fairgrounds that flooded every spring. I was the guy they sent when something needed to be checked, inventoried, secured, or written off. I had a county truck, a ring of keys heavier than it had any right to be, and a clipboard that I genuinely liked. People laugh at that. I liked having a list and crossing things off it. After 19 years of marriage that ended quiet, and a son who calls twice a year, the clipboard was the most reliable relationship I had left. I'm telling you that part because it matters later. The board found that part. But I'm getting ahead. The town is called Ashby Hollow. You won't find it interesting. Maybe 4,000 people now, less every census. We had a paper mill once and a grain operation, and before all of that we had the railroad, which is the only reason a town like Ashby Hollow existed in the first place. The line came through in 1887. The Krellin and Northern, a freight and passenger spur that connected the river towns to the main interchange, 40 miles east. The depot got built in 1901. Brick and timber, 2 stories, a freight wing on the south end, a passenger platform on the north. For about 60 years, it was the most important building in the county. Then the passenger service got cut in 1961. The freight tapered through the 70s, and the last train of any kind came through in 1983, the year I graduated high school. After that, the depot just sat. The railroad company folded into a bigger one. That one folded into another. And somewhere in all the folding, the actual deed to the building landed on the county, which is how these things go. Nobody wanted it. Nobody had money to tear it down. So it sat at the bottom of Depot Street with plywood over the windows for almost 40 years. And the only people who went in were teenagers and copper thieves, and twice that I know of, people who didn't have anywhere else to sleep. Last year, the county finally got a redevelopment grant. The plan was to turn the depot into a little museum and a farmer's market pavilion, the kind of thing every dying town tries, where you spend $2 million to preserve a building that reminds everyone of when the town wasn't dying. Before any of that could happen, somebody had to go in, inventory what was there, document the structural condition, photograph everything for the Historical Society, flag the hazards, and get the building ready for the contractors and the preservation people. 6 weeks of work, maybe 8. Quiet, solo, exactly the kind of job I was good at, and exactly the kind of job they liked to hand a man 2 years from his pension so he'd have something to do that didn't involve climbing. I want to be honest about something before I go further. I took that job on purpose. There were other things I could have been assigned. When the depot came up in the meeting, I asked for it. I asked for it because of my father, and I'll get to him, but I need you to know that I walked into that building wanting to be there. That's not nothing. I've thought about it a lot since. The first day was just the first day. I want to walk you through it so you understand how ordinary it was, because everything that came after only landed the way it did because the beginning was so ordinary. I got there a little after 8 in the morning with a thermos, 2 flashlights, a respirator, my camera, the clipboard, and the keys. The county locksmith had already changed the padlocks the week before, so I had fresh keys that actually turned, which after 19 years felt like a small luxury. The front of the depot faces Depot Street, and there's a half-circle drive where the buses used to pull in back when there were buses. Weeds in the concrete. A historical marker sign, the brown kind, faded almost white. The plywood over the front windows had been tagged and retagged so many times it looked like fabric. Inside, the smell hit me first, and I'm going to spend a second on the smell because it never left the whole time I was there. Mothballs. That was the strangest part. Underneath the rot and the dust and the wet brick basement smell, there was mothballs, sharp and clean, the way my grandmother's closet smelled. I never found the source. I looked. There were no mothballs. But every single night I worked that building, the mothball smell was there, strongest near the ticket windows, and I never got used to it. The main hall was beautiful in the way that wrecked things are beautiful. High ceiling, exposed timber trusses, water stains in long brown tongues down the plaster. 2 ticket windows with the brass grills still in them, boarded from behind. A row of those long oak benches, the church pew kind, 3 of them still bolted to the floor and 1 tipped on its side. Dead vending machines against the east wall, an old cigarette machine, and a drink machine from probably the 80s. Glass cracked. Everything inside long gone or fossilized. A bank of staff lockers in the back hall, half of them with the doors hanging open. The freight office on the south end, the station master's desk still in it, drawers swollen shut. A baggage room with empty shelving. A maintenance closet that smelled like a different kind of bad. And stairs going down to a basement records room I didn't touch until the second week because the county told me the floor down there might not be sound. And the board. The departure board hangs over the main hall, mounted high on the wall above where the ticket windows are, angled down so people on the floor could read it. It's a split flap board, the mechanical kind, the kind that used to be in every train station and airport before everything went digital. Rows of little hinged panels, each one printed with letters and numbers that flip over to spell out destinations and times. When those boards update, the panels all flutter at once. This rolling clatter, like a deck of cards being shuffled by 100 hands. If you're old enough, you remember the sound. It's a good sound. It used to mean something was about to happen. The Ashby Hollow board has 8 rows. Each row has a destination, a platform number, a scheduled time, and a status column. When I first saw it that morning, it was blank. Not blank like turned off, blank like every panel had flipped to its empty face, just rows of dull beige rectangles. I photographed it. I noted it on the clipboard. Departure board intact, all flaps in neutral position, no power assumed. Recommend electrical inspection before contractor entry. I figured that was the end of my involvement with it. A nice artifact for the museum. They'd probably restore it and run a loop of fake destinations for the tourists. The thing has no power. I want to be clear about that because it's the part that broke me eventually. The depot's main electrical was cut at the pole decades ago. I confirmed it the first day. Dead outlets, dead lights. The panel in the maintenance closet, corroded shut and disconnected from the meter, which the utility had pulled in the 90s. I ran the whole building off a portable generator and work lights I brought in myself. And I only ran the generator during the day. There is no wiring feeding that board. I traced it. The conduit runs up into the wall above the ticket windows and just stops at a junction box that's full of mud dauber nests and nothing else. The board should not be able to do anything. It's a mechanical display with no motor power and no controller and no signal. The first week was clean. I want to give you that week because I keep it. It was good work. I photographed every room. I inventoried the freight office, found old waybills, a stamp pad, a ring of switch keys, a 1950s calendar from a feed company. I cataloged the lockers. I logged the structural problems, the storm water coming in along the north platform foundation, the rotted sill plate under the freight wing, the section of platform concrete that had heaved and cracked into a shelf you could trip on. I flagged the copper that thieves had already pulled from the signal box outside, and the copper they'd missed. I ate my lunch on one of the good benches with the doors open and the spring light coming in, and I thought, this is the best assignment I've had in years, and I meant it. I found the inspection logbook on the third day in the station master's desk, and that mattered later too. It was the building's own logbook, not train schedules, but the maintenance log, where the staff used to note things. Boiler serviced, window glazed, platforms swept. The last entry was from March 1983. Whoever made it just wrote final and the date and signed it M. Krellin. And I sat with that for a while. Because Krellin was the name of the railroad, and I wondered if that was the last descendant of the family that built the line, signing off the last day. And I felt the kind of sadness you feel for strangers when you're a certain age. I started a new entry in that same logbook myself. I don't know why. It wasn't county procedure. I had my own clipboard for the official record. But it felt right to keep the building's own book going, so I wrote the date and county inventory commenced R. Facilities. And I kept writing in it every day after that. That logbook is the only physical proof I have of any of this. And I'll tell you at the end what happened to it. The board first changed on the 9th night. I'd shifted to evening hours by then because the spring storms were rolling in every afternoon. And I wanted the generator and the lights away from the roof leaks. So I'd come in around 6, work till midnight, sometimes later. That night I was in the freight office bagging waybills when I heard it. The clatter, that rolling flutter of 100 panels turning over at once. I knew the sound before I knew what it was. The way you know a voice from another room. I came out into the main hall with my flashlight and I stood there with my heart going, and I looked up at the board and the top row had filled in. Mercy Junction. Platform 3, 12 o'clock. On time. I'm going to tell you exactly what I thought because I think it matters that I didn't panic. I thought kids. I thought somebody had gotten in, rigged the board, was hiding, having a laugh at the old county guy. I went through that whole building room by room with my flashlight and my heart in my throat, checking the lockers. The basement door still chained the way I'd left it. The freight doors barred from inside. The plywood over every window solid and screwed down from when the county had secured it. I was alone. There was no other way in. I checked twice. Then I thought, vibration, a passing truck on the highway, settling of the old mechanism, gravity finally tipping some balanced panels. Split flat boards are just hinged flaps. Maybe 40 years of dust finally let go and a row dropped into a configuration by chance. But that's not how those boards work. Each flap is on a chain, indexed to a position. They don't fall randomly into words. Mercy Junction is not a thing dust spells, and there was no Mercy Junction. I knew the line. The Krellin and Northern had 11 stops, and I'd grown up hearing every one of them. There was no Mercy Junction on it. There was no Mercy Junction in the county or the state that I'd ever heard of. I photographed it. Of course I photographed it. The flash bounced off the panels, and in the photo, you can read it clear as anything. Mercy Junction, Platform 3, 12 o'clock, on time. I have that photo. I've shown it to exactly 3 people, and I'm done showing it to anyone. Platform 3 was the other thing. The Ashby Hollow Depot has 2 platforms, north and south. There is no Platform 3. There never was a Platform 3. I just spent a week measuring and photographing every inch of that property, and I could tell you there was no Platform 3. I wrote it in the logbook. 9th night. Board updated single row. Destination unknown, not on CNN line. Platform 3 does not exist. No power source identified. No entry point found. Will monitor. I read that entry now, and I can see the man who wrote it still believing he was going to solve it, still believing it was a problem on his clipboard. The next morning, the board was blank again. All neutral. I'd half convinced myself by daylight that I'd been tired, that I'd misread an old artifact, that maybe somebody really had rigged it on a timer and it had reset. I almost didn't write the night up in my official county log. But I'm a thorough man, it's the only thing I've ever really been, so I noted it dry and clinical. Departure board displayed anomalous text overnight, cause undetermined, recommend the board be examined by a qualified conservator. Cover myself. Move on. It updated again the 11th night, then the 12th. By the 3rd week, it was updating almost every night, always after midnight, never while I was looking directly at it. That was a thing I noticed early and never stopped noticing. I never once saw the panels actually turn. I heard them. I'd be in another room, or I'd glance down at my clipboard, or I'd be loading the truck, and the clatter would come, and when I looked, the board had changed, like it didn't want to witness to the act, only to the result. I tried to catch it. I set up my phone on a little tripod, aimed at the board, and recorded for hours. And here's the thing that I still can't sit with comfortably. On the recordings, the clatter happens, you hear it playing, and the board is different before and after, but the video itself shows the panels static the whole time, no motion, the sound with no movement. I watched that footage frame by frame at home until my eyes hurt. The destinations stacked up over those weeks. I started keeping a separate page just for them. And I'll read you some because the names are the part people don't forget. Mercy Junction, North Ellery, Stillwater Cut, the Bellwether Stop, Canaan Ridge, St. Vale, Hollow Creek Siding, West Lorne, Ashford Terminal, Blackwater Spur, Coker's Landing, the Narrows, and a few that were just numbers in a single word like down, 414, or Ravenna held. None of them were real. I want to be careful here, because this is where I did the most work, the real work, the part I'm actually proud of even now. I didn't just decide they weren't real, I checked. I spent the back half of those weeks turning into an amateur railroad historian. And the county would have fired me if they'd known how much of my paid time went into it, but it didn't feel like a choice. I went to the county records office and pulled every railroad map they had, the original 1887 survey, the 1923 reorganization, the 1950s freight maps, the abandonment filings from the 70s. I went to the Historical Society, which is 2 retired teachers and a room full of binders, and they were thrilled to have a visitor. And I went through every binder. I looked at the lines, old timetables, the printed paper kind, the ones the Historical Society had framed. 11 stops, all 11 on every map. None of them named anything close to what the board was posting. I cross-checked against the state's GIS database, against old postal route maps, against a national index of abandoned rail stations, that some hobbyist had spent his life compiling. Nothing. Not abandoned, not renamed, not consolidated. The places on that board were not places that had ever been on the line. They were not places that had ever been. And that should have been the end of it. A board posting gibberish that happens to look like town names, eerie, sure, but gibberish. Except the names weren't gibberish. And I figured that out the night I cross-referenced the wrong thing. I'd been treating them as places, looking for them on maps. But one night, going back through the Historical Society's binders, I wasn't looking at maps, I was looking at the old newspaper archive, the bound volumes of the Ashby Hollow Courier, going back to the 20s. I was actually looking for something about my father, and I came across a name in a 1949 article that stopped me cold. The headline was about a man who'd gone missing. Local man worked the freight side at the depot, walked off one winter night and never came home. Presumed to have hopped a train or frozen in the woods or just left his life the way men sometimes did then. His name was Elias Vale. And the article said his family, after he disappeared, had moved out to a place the writer called the Old Saint Settlement. And I sat there with St. Vale on my list, and I felt the floor of the thing drop out. It wasn't a place. Or it was, but it was also a person. St. Vale? Elias Vale, the saint of the family that lost him, gone from this depot in the winter of 1949. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, and I went back through everything with new eyes, and the pattern came apart and came together at the same time, the way patterns do when they're real and you've been refusing them. North Ellery. Yes, there was an Ellery family. Their son went north to the war, and the telegram came to the depot, and his mother collapsed on the platform reading it. The courier wrote it up because it was a small town and a hard thing. He never came home either. Lost somewhere in the Pacific. No body, just north and gone. Hollow Creek sighting. A sighting's a short track off the main line. There'd been an accident at the Hollow Creek crossing in 1957. A car and a freight train. 3 people, a whole family from out of town nobody could fully identify, buried in the county plot. Held there. Sidetracked. Coker's Landing. A man named Coker, drowned at the river landing south of town in the 30s. Drunk, the paper said, though his widow always said otherwise. It wasn't a list of places. It was a list of people who had left from here and never arrived anywhere. Disappearances, deaths without bodies. People the town had quietly written off the way the county had written off the building. The board wasn't naming towns. It was naming destinations the way an old railman would have understood the word. Not where the train stops, but where the person was bound. Where they ended up. And the names were eerie and grounded at the same time because that's how people in a small town actually talked about the dead and the gone. They didn't say died. They said he went up north. She passed over to the other place. He shipped out and never came back. The board spoke in the old euphemisms, the ones the living use because the plain words are too heavy to carry. I'm not saying I worked all that out cleanly in one night. It took me the better part of a week. Hunched over those binders while the 2 retired teachers brought me coffee and asked if I'd found what I was looking for, and I lied and said almost. But once I had it, the time started to matter too. And that's where it stopped being history and started being now. The board had begun posting times that were specific, not just 12 o'clock. It would post 4:14 and 11:52 and 2:08. And I started writing them down with the dates because by then I wrote everything down. And one morning I was at the diner getting coffee before I went home to sleep, and the woman at the counter was telling another regular that old Pete Marsh had passed in the night. Heart. They found him in his chair, and somebody asked what time, and she said the daughter found him around 4:15. 414 had been on the board 2 nights before. I'd photographed it. Down, 414. I told myself it was a coincidence. I'm a practical man. 4:15 is a normal time for an old heart to stop. Old men die in the early morning. It's a known thing. It doesn't take a magic board to predict that someone in a town of 4,000 will die at a likely hour. I told myself that. But I'd written 414 down 2 days before Pete Marsh's heart stopped at 414. And Pete Marsh was a railman's son, and his father had worked the signal box at this depot, and the board had said down, and a signalman's word for a track that's clear and a man who's fallen is the same word, down. That's when the fear changed character. Up until then, it had been the fear of not understanding, the clean, almost exciting fear of a mystery. After Pete Marsh, it became the other kind. The kind where you understand just enough to know you're standing too close to something and you don't know its rules, and it has not noticed you yet, but it might. Because here's what I'd been ignoring. If the board was a timetable for the gone, then it was still running. The Krellin and Northern hadn't carried a passenger since 1961 and hadn't run a wheel since 1983. But something was still keeping the schedule. Still posting departures. Still, in whatever way it meant the word, moving people somewhere. And the building I'd asked to be assigned to, the building I'd eaten my lunch in with the spring light coming through, was the station for it. I should tell you about my father now, because I can't put it off any longer, and because the board didn't let me put it off either. My father, Daniel, worked for the railroad, maintenance of way track gangs, ballast, the switches, the signal maintenance. He worked out of this depot from 1955 until the freight wound down. And he loved it the way men of that generation loved a hard job that defined them. He used to bring me down to the depot on Sundays when there was no traffic and let me sit at the station master's desk and play with the switch keys. The mothball smell. I knew it the first day, and I didn't let myself know that I knew it. It was his coat, his railroad coat, hung in a locker here, and it smelled of mothballs, because my mother packed it with them in the off-season, and I'd press my face into it as a boy, and the depot smelled like my father's coat from the moment I walked in, and I had spent 9 days not admitting that to myself. In the winter of 1979, when I was 13, there was an accident on the line. A maintenance crew working a section north of town in the dark, in the cold, and a string of cars that wasn't supposed to be moving moved. 3 men were hurt. 1 man was killed. His name was Walter Brune, and he was my father's closest friend. And my father had been supposed to be on that section that night and wasn't, because he traded the shift to go to my school thing, some recital, some nothing. I genuinely don't remember what it was. And Walt took his place on the track, and Walt died on it. My father never put it down. He carried Walt Brune the rest of his life. He retired early, drank more than he should have, and he died in 1994 in the county hospital. And the last clear thing he said to me, the last thing before the morphine took the words, was that he kept hearing the board call. He was out of his head, we thought. He kept saying he could hear it calling the departures, and he was afraid he'd miss his. We thought it was the railroad in his blood, the dying brain reaching for the thing it knew best. I held his hand and told him there were no more trains. Dad, the line's dead, you can rest. I told a dying man the trains had stopped. I want you to understand that I had forgotten he said that, genuinely forgotten. The way you forget the things that are too sharp to hold. 26 years. And then, on the night I'm about to tell you about, the board posted Brunn Platform 1, Narration. And I remembered every word my father said in that hospital bed all at once, standing in the dark in the building where he'd worked. And I had to sit down on the tipped-over bench because my legs wouldn't hold me. Brunn, Walter Brunn, Platform 1. No time, just held. And the next night it posted again, and this time it had a time. And the time was 7:40, which I didn't understand until I was driving home and passed the cemetery and remembered that Walt Brunn's funeral had been at 7:40 in the morning, an odd early hour, because the family wanted to bury him before the day shift, so the men who loved him could come and still make their work. And my father had been a pallbearer, and I'd been 13 and cold and standing in the snow at 7:40 in the morning watching my father carry his friend. The board knew the funeral time of a man who died 40 years before. The board knew the thing my father couldn't put down. And I understood, sitting in my truck outside the cemetery with the engine running and the heater going and my hands not quite steady, that the board had not been posting random dead. It had been working its way toward me. Pete Marsh, the signalman's son, a railman. Then Brunn, my father's man. It was following the line in. It was following my line in. I stopped sleeping right around then. I'd go to the depot and I'd dread the clatter and I'd wait for it. I started talking to the board, which I'm not proud of. I'd ask it things. I'd say out loud, "What do you want? Who's it for?" And the board never answered because the board doesn't speak. It never spoke once the whole time. It just posted and held its silence, which is the worst thing a thing like that can do. A monster you can fight. A timetable you can only read. The PA system crackled exactly twice in all those weeks. And I'm going to tell you about both times, and then I'm going to tell you about the platform, and then I'm going to tell you about the choice, and then I'll let you go, because I know this has been long. But it was long for me too. The first time the PA crackled, I was in the basement records room. I'd finally gone down there in the 5th week after the engineer cleared the floor. It's a low brick room, water-stained with steel filing cabinets and shelves of bound records. The depot's own paper, going back to 1901. Manifests, ticket stubs, employee files, incident reports. A historian's dream and a tired man's nightmare. I was down there with my work light cataloging when the PA speaker in the corner, a speaker that had no power, gave a single soft crackle, the sound a live system makes a half second before someone speaks. And then nothing. I stood in that basement with my heart slamming and waited for a voice. And there was no voice. It's just the crackle, the readiness, the throat clearing of something that decided not to speak. I have never been so frightened by silence in my life. The second time was later, and worse, and I'll come to it. In the basement, I found the thing that broke the last of my doubt. In the employee files, in a folder of old service records, there was a typed manifest from the passenger era, a daily departure sheet, the kind the station master filled out, listing the scheduled departures for a given day. And clipped to the back of one of them, undated on different paper, was a departure sheet that listed destinations I recognized. Mercy Junction, North Ellery, St. Vale, the names from the board. Typed on a sheet that looked official on depot letterhead in a hand that matched the other sheets. Someone who worked at this depot decades ago had been keeping the other schedule, writing it down. The departures for the gone. There was no signature on it, but there was a note at the bottom, pencil, faded, and it said, "Do not announce these. They board on their own. Keep the board clear after midnight or it fills." And below that, in the same pencil, Brunn's was held 3 years before. We did not know to read it. held 3 years before. The board had posted a departure for Walt Brune 3 years before he died, and whoever kept this depot back then hadn't known how to read it. And a man died who maybe didn't have to. That note has lived in my head every day since. We did not know to read it. They knew the board called the dead. What they figured out too late was that sometimes it called them before they were dead. That it posted the departure first. That it was sometimes a warning nobody knew how to hear. And I had a living name to test that against. Because 2 nights after I found that note, the board posted a name that wasn't a dead man's. It posted a name I knew was alive. It posted Cole. Cole is my son. Daniel Cole, named for my father. He goes by Cole because he doesn't like Daniel, and that's a whole sad thing between us I won't get into it. But he's 31, and he's alive, and he lives 3 states away, and he calls me twice a year. And the board posted Cole, Platform 1, and a time 9:02, and the status said boarding. Not held, not down. Boarding. I called my son at 1 in the morning. He didn't answer, of course. It was the middle of the night, and we aren't close, and a 1 a.m. call from your father is a heart attack call, a someone died call. He texted back, just, "You okay?" And I texted back that I was fine. "Sorry, but dial. Go back to sleep." And I sat in that depot for the rest of the night, staring at boarding and trying to understand whether I had just seen a schedule or a warning or a sentence already passed. Here's what I want you to understand about the choice, because the title of this is going to make people think. The scary part is the impossible places, and the impossible places were not the scary part. The scary part was that I had a board in front of me that I now believed could post a departure for a living person, my living son. And I did not know if reading it could change it, or if reading it caused it, or if the only thing my attention did was make me a witness who couldn't do anything but watch. I thought about the note. Keep the board clear after midnight or it fills. Whoever wrote that had a method. They didn't destroy the board, they didn't shut it down. There was nothing to shut down. No power, I'd proven that. They kept it clear. They went in after midnight and they reset the flaps to neutral by hand every night, so it couldn't hold a departure long enough to mean anything. They tended it like a grave, like a switch that has to be thrown or the train takes the wrong track. So that's what I started doing. After Cole appeared, I went to the board. There's a maintenance ladder, and the flaps can be turned by hand. Each one indexes with a soft click. And I cleared it. I turned every panel back to neutral. It took me 40 minutes. My hands were shaking, and the mothball smell was thick as fog, and I cleared my son's name off that board flap by flap, and I climbed down, and I sat on the bench, and I waited. It didn't refill that night. First clear night in weeks. I cleared it the next night too, and the next. And here's the part I have to be honest about, the part that's the real horror of this for me. The part that isn't about a building. I realized I could not leave. The job was almost done. The contractors were due. The redevelopment was funded, and the Preservation Society wanted the board restored as the centerpiece of their little museum. They wanted to fix it up and run a charming loop of the old destinations for the tourists, and I could not let that happen, and I could not explain why, and I could not leave, because if I left, who clears it after midnight? Who keeps it from filling? Who reads my son's name and turns it back to neutral before boarding becomes whatever comes after boarding? I went to the county and I argued as hard as a man 2 years from his pension dares argue that the board was too fragile to restore, that it should be sealed, left in place, walled off, not powered, not touched. I made up structural reasons. I made up conservation reasons. I lied to people I'd worked beside for 19 years. And some of them looked at me funny because I'd never been a man who got attached to a building. And here I was nearly weeping over a split flap sign. The redevelopment is moving forward. They've agreed to preserve the board in situ and defer restoration pending funding, which is bureaucrat for they'll leave it alone for now and get to it later, and later is the only thing I bought and later runs out. The second time the PA crackled was my last night doing the inventory, the night before I was supposed to hand the building over to the contractors. I'd cleared the board at midnight like always. I was packing my truck, and the PA crackled, that live half-second throat clearing. And this time it didn't go silent. This time very faint under the hiss. There was the sound of a board updating in a station that wasn't this one. That clatter, but distant, like it was coming through a phone line from somewhere far down the track. And then a tone, the 2-note tone they used to play before an announcement, and then the crackle cut out, and the depot was dead silent again, and the board above the ticket windows, the board I had cleared 40 minutes before, had one row filled. It said, Ashby Hollow, Platform 1, and no time at all. And the status said, all aboard. The destination was here. The board had posted this depot, this town, as a departure. For the first time, it wasn't naming somewhere down the line. It was naming where I was standing, and I understood finally and completely that the building wasn't the station for the line. The building was on the line, a stop. And every stop on a line is also a departure if you're standing on the right platform at the wrong time. I didn't clear it that night. I want to tell you I was brave, but the truth is I couldn't make my body climb the ladder. I left it saying Ashby Hollow, all aboard, and I locked the building and I drove home, and I did not sleep. And in the morning the contractors came, and I handed off the keys, and I drove out of the lot, and I have not gone back inside. But I go back. That's the thing I have to live with. I go back almost every night, and I park on Depot Street, and I sit in my truck, and I watch the boarded windows, and I tell myself I'm just checking, and what I'm really doing is keeping the schedule. Because last week my son Cole called me, and he never calls in between, and he called to tell me he's moving back. He took a job 2 towns over. He's coming home, he says, because I'm getting older and we've wasted enough years, and he sounded happy, happier than I've heard him in a decade. And I should have been overjoyed. And instead, I felt the floor drop out because I have a board in a locked building that posted my son's name and the status boarding, and now my son is boarding a U-Haul and driving toward Ashby Hollow, toward the line, and I cannot tell him why he shouldn't come home without sounding like a man who's lost his mind. So I keep the keys. The county never asked for them back. With that many keys nobody noticed, I kept the one. And I go in after midnight when nobody's watching the old depot that's waiting on its grant money. And I climb the ladder, and I clear the board. Every night. I turn the flaps back to neutral with my own hands. I clear St. Vale and North Ellery and Coker's Landing and whatever else is filled in, and most of all I clear my son's name if it's there. And some nights it's there and some nights it isn't, and I never know which it'll be until I'm at the top of the ladder. I wrote all of this in the depot's own logbook, the one the last railman closed in 1983, the one I reopened. I kept it going the whole time. Every departure, every date, every name. It's the only complete record. I keep it in the freight office desk in the bottom drawer, and I update it every night after I clear the board so that whoever comes after me, and someone will come after me, because I'm 60 years old and I can't climb that ladder forever, will know to read it. Will know that the board has to be kept clear after midnight or it fills. Will know how to read a name that's posted before it's time. The last thing I'll tell you is the thing that made me finally write all this down for strangers, instead of just keeping it in a logbook in a dead building. 3 nights ago I cleared the board, and it was quiet. And I went to write the entry in the log. And the freight office desk was the way I'd left it, and the logbook was there. And I opened it to the next blank page, and it wasn't blank. Someone had made an entry already in the night before me in handwriting I knew because I've been looking at it for 2 months, the same hand that signed off the building in 1983. M. Creelin. And the entry was that night's date, my date, and it said, "Board kept clear. Good man. Relief arriving." And below it, the time 9:02. 9:02 was Cole's time, the boarding time. And the words underneath the date, in that old hand, said relief arriving, which is what a railman writes in a log when the next shift is coming to take over the post. I haven't told my son to turn the U-Haul around. I don't know how I sit in my truck on Depot Street and I watch the boarded windows of a building the county thinks is empty, and I keep the schedule and I wait to find out whether relief arriving means my son is coming to take care of his aging father or coming to take over the post, or whether on this line those were always the same departure and the board knew it before I did, the way it knew about Walt Brune 3 years early, the way it always knows, the way it just sits up there in the dark with no power and no voice and keeps the truest schedule in the county. The contractors start the real work next month. There's a museum coming. There's going to be a brand new digital sign out front, the bright kind, scrolling the hours and the exhibits. I drove past the supplier's lot in the next town over, and they've got it built already, sitting on a pallet, powered up and testing, scrolling a demo loop. Welcome to the Ashby Hollow Depot Museum. Hours 9 to 5. And then, between the lines of the demo loop, just for a second, before it cycled back to the top, it scrolled one more line that wasn't in any demo anybody programmed. Now boarding. Platform 1. All destinations. The board doesn't need the old building. I see that now. It never needed the power or the brick or the line. It just needs a place that posts departures, and we keep building those because that's what people do. We can't stand a station that's gone quiet. We always turn the sign back on. I clear the board every night. I'll clear it tonight. And one of these nights, I'm going to climb that ladder, and it's going to say my name. And I already know I won't clear that one, because by then, I'll understand it's not a warning anymore. It'll just be the schedule. And the strange thing, the thing I can't explain to anybody, is that some nights, when I think about it, when I think about a train I can't see pulling into a platform that was removed 40 years ago, calling a destination that isn't on any map, I'm not afraid of it the way I was. I'm a man who likes a list. I like to know where things are bound. I just wish I knew how to read the time before it's mine.